If you'd like to nurture a more comfort and compassionate homeschool atmosphere, check out the Peaceful Press resources. We help families bond through beautiful living books and fun projects and margin to comfort each other, to love each other, to explore mutual interests together. And when you homeschool in this way, in this life giving, peaceful way, you help your children have a better sense of their inner world, process unrest, and in so doing, give them some tools to overcome or even prevent addictions. You can save 10% at the Peaceful Press shop with code Restoration10. And we just love to help you get started with this peaceful way of homeschooling. This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home podcast. This is the show where we talk about the peaceful path to connected families and restored communities. Today on the show, Emelie and I are going to be talking about developing a virtue of being steadfast, of being able to push through when things are hard. But if you are struggling right now, if you need more support and community, the Restoration Home community is open and ready to welcome you. When you sign up for the Restoration Home community, you get access to weekly habits, lesson plans, a supportive community, and an amazing resource of moms who are intentional like you and finding the best ideas for raising a connected family and a restored community. You can join today and use code SPRINGOPEN20 to get 20% off your membership at restorationhomecommunity.com. Emelie, I'm so excited to chat today about this virtue of being steadfast or steadfastness. And for both of us, we are women, and that means we have had seasons of being emotional or feeling sad. And obviously, that can kind of cycle with our cycle every month. But I would just love to talk today about some of the things that we have done to be able to stir up joy even in the midst of that, because as we're finding out through science books like Four Habits of Joy-Filled People, if we aren't nurturing joy-filled homes, it makes it really hard for our children to bond with us, for us to bond with them. It makes attachment more of a struggle, and it really makes it harder for them to learn, because if the atmosphere is not joyful, if it's sad and oppressive, it's harder for our children to settle into learning. And sometimes we're just not feeling it. Sometimes we do have to fake it. And one of the things that, as I look back on our season of being missionaries in Mexico, what probably saved you guys was that my husband was really happy. Your dad, my husband, was very happy. Not all the time there, but he was just thrived on adventure. And so I'm sure that he was somewhat of a buffer because he was enjoying, driving those muddy roads, and he probably loved it when we were following a Jeep full of Mexican military with their like Uzis, all holding all their Uzis. Like, he probably thought that was fun. I, on the other hand, was a little scared and depressed about it, but we made it through that season, and there's a few things we did, but I'd love to just hear your thoughts on being steadfast even when things are hard.
Yeah, it's funny that I love that this is a topic, and I think that God is like he's so faithful to bring things up in our hearts and our minds in a season when he's also wanting to heal something that he's bringing up. And so if there is something that you're really struggling with right now, like being steadfast or just a onslaught of, maybe maybe it's losses of friendships, maybe it is, something, and you're like, why is this happening? I really truly believe that God brings things up because he has on hand healing for that area in your life. And so I just want to encourage moms out there from the get-go that if you are really resonating with this and you're like, I am so not steadfast right now, I'm like a dead jellyfish, I'm beyond spineless, that there is healing, that God is faithful. And definitely in my own life right now, the whole concept of steadfastness is just such a theme because I am I'm just realizing that who I want to be as a person is work and it takes so much effort to get there. And so not only is it the work of getting there, but it's the work of staying there. And so when it comes to steadfastness, a couple things just for her thoughts on it. Know yourself. So, like for me, for instance, when I eat gluten, I get really, really grumpy. If I watch too many TV shows, like we know that if you have a giant dopamine spike, you're going to have a giant dopamine dump. So, if you're doing something like scrolling on Twitter or X, as it's now called, or watching a few episodes or something that you do to sort of numb the pain or feel good, just get a dopamine hit, know that that thing that you are doing is going to create a massive dopamine trough. It is the exact same thing happening in your brain as somebody doing heroin. And so if you are constantly feeding yourself on dopamine highs, you are going to be more depressed and have a harder time being emotionally steadfast the next day. We know that a lot of foods have inflammatory effects. Gluten, sugar, a lot of these things have inflammatory effects. Inflammatory in turn causes mood swings, depression, anxiety. And so if you're having a hard time, check your diet out. Like we have to be thorough with what we can control for the sake of walking out who Christ has called us to be and walking with joy and authority in the areas of our life that Christ has given us authority. So if you're a mom, that's being a mom. If you're a wife, that's being a wife. If you're a sister or your job, whatever it is, like keeping your home, these are areas that you have stewardship and you have authority and you're called then to be steadfast in that. And these are really sort of, they're not simple things per se, but they're things that we can easily control that we know affects our moods and our ability to be consistently joyful. And so that's kind of like the thing. And this is what I'm working on. Like this is very much I'm in the trenches of this.
It's so good, Emily, and I appreciate you kind of going over even some of the dietary things or the hormonal things. I mean, I've talked several times on the podcast about how it took me a while to realize that a couple of days before I get my cycle, I feel sad. And if I am alert to what the timing is, then I can just take a little better care of myself in those couple of days before I get my period. Or I can give my family a little bit more grace instead of thinking that I'm sad because of something they did. It's just hormones. And so being more aware of that. And, in the restoration home community, there's a great conversation going on right now about how people are supplementing. Some people are adding a lot of extra progesterone. Some people are adding some extra progesterone. Like there's a lot of different ways. And obviously, we're not giving medical advice. We're just sharing how we are handling this life that we're in. And I think there's a lot of things that can cause us to have a hard time with our moods. That it can be marriage issues, it can be financial issues, it can be hormones, it can be a child going through something, but there are ways that we can push through. And a couple of things that I've done in this last season, like I was over the last couple of years, there have been a few low seasons for me, and a couple things I've done in the last few years to get a handle on that were making sure that I was writing down thankfulness, just really noticing the good in my life. And every day, as soon as I've finished reading my Bible, I write down a few things I'm thankful for. I have taken to, this is in the connection challenge, we talk about hugging your kids, but I've actually taken to getting more hugs from my husband. Like, I I need that serotonin boost. I don't have a lot of little kids anymore. You lucky ladies who still have little kids around to cuddle you and get all that serotonin from. I don't have a lot of little kids around anymore. And so, in the morning when I wake up, I give my husband a big hug and I smile at him. And as we are, befriending the people in our home and loving and encouraging the people in our home, that's going to help break some of this. Also, getting out with a friend. Like in my early years of motherhood, it was so therapeutic for me, even just take a walk and talk on the phone with somebody. Like it is hard days when you're taking care of a baby by yourself or taking care of a baby and a toddler. It is really intense. And they're, even as they grow, like one of the big mistakes I made in my parenting was attuning too much with my children, as in sharing too much with them because it was hard. And instead of talking to a neutral third party, my kids were right at hand. And so learning how to nurture friendships where you can say, "Hey, can I call you? I just need to talk to someone," or "Hey, can we go on a walk? Can we meet at the park?" I remember after I had my, 6th baby, I had had an emergency C-section. We were in a bit of a hard spot, and, even leading up to that 6th baby, and there was a friend we just met at the park sometimes, and it was such an encouragement to have another mom. She was also going through a hard time in her life, and just being around another adult woman who was going through similar stuff was so healing for me. But as well, sometimes we need a little bit of extra help. Sometimes we do need to talk to a therapist or get EMDR or write a letter to our broken inner child. And I was reading a book, and this woman in the book, she quotes a book called The Best of You by Allison Cook. Allison Cook writes about internal family systems for Christian families. So it's a therapy model, and she's a Christian, so she talks about how to sort of reparent your inner child. And I I'm a big fan of welcoming Jesus into that pain and letting Jesus speak to our broken, sad little inner child that feels scared and insecure. But sometimes we're not there yet. And so she talks in this book about how the way that we break out of the tiny containers we're putting ourselves in. So if you've been dealing with depression or anger or fear, and I think so much of anger honestly does track right back to fear. Like you get mad at somebody, well, what's underneath that? You yell at your kid, what's underneath that? There's probably a fear that they won't measure up, or this person will let you down, or you won't have what you need. And so, as you sort of identify these tiny containers, she says, the way we break out of these tiny containers is, she said, the way we break out of it is by making and keeping small but important commitments to yourself each day. If you didn't experience security growing up as a child, you may feel a sense of chaos internally, but you can teach yourself what safety feels like by building trust with yourself. Start by making and keeping small commitments to yourself. Choose something basic that also feels important to you and commit to it for 1 week. So, like in the Restoration Home community, as we make a commitment to just take a nature walk 5 days a week, or don't look at our phones before we've had our morning routine, we're making these commitments that are actually helping us build a sense of security. And she says, as you build consistency into your days and weeks, you start to trust yourself. You can do small things each day to create a sense of order and predictability. Remind yourself that learning to honor yourself in small and big ways is key to reestablishing a sense of safety. As you do this, you are teaching yourself that there is a grown up in the room who can be trusted, and that grown up is you. And I think, for so many of us who maybe had a little bit of neglect or insecurity or even real outright chaos in childhood, learning how to start to create more of a sense of peace with the Lord is part of the job of adulthood.
Totally. I love that so much because I think a lot of times our feelings of overwhelm or the sense that we don't have the capacity to be steadfast is because we look at ourselves and we're like, I've tried to commit to a morning time for the last 3 months and I just can't do it. And all these senses of being inadequate in a way. And I think I think it's soul sucking. I think it's really soul sucking actually. And having that capacity to commit to yourself. And I think there's, and I think that can in and of itself be a healing process of knowing at some deep level that you are worth keeping promises to. And I think that's something a lot of us don't feel is like we're, I think every child is born believing that their parent, like having a sort of promise connection to their parent of you are my parent and that position means that you promise to protect me and keep me emotionally and physically safe. And so often as parents, even really incidentally, the best of parents are going to break that promise and be emotionally volatile or put their child in a situation. I don't mean like scary dangerous. I just mean, as a small child when your parents fight, that's a scary position to be in. Or, when you are overwhelmed as a mom, which happens, and that's a scary place for your child, and we've all been in that place as children. And so this is the beautiful thing about the redemption of Christ is that we can heal from the inside out. We can move past this. This is not the end of our story. But going back to that keeping of promises and knowing that you are worth You are worth Christ going to the cross, and you are certainly worth keeping promises to yourself. And we can never underestimate the importance of tiny things, of tiny beginnings. And so don't I'm a idealist and a dreamer, and I have these grand plans. Like, my to-do list is always way too long. But learning to just be so excited when we keep small promises to ourselves. And so if you get to the gym 3 times a week, celebrate that. If you get there 1 time a week, celebrate that. If you manage to hold your tongue once, celebrate that. And I think so often a lot of us as Christians are also taught, like, pride comes before a fall, and there's a sense of, like, humility. It's such a false humility, and it's like um I just have been enjoying a season across the last year of nanning, and in that nanning, I'm with these kids, and I'm with them just enough to really love them, and not so much that I'm, like, tearing my hair out. It's like that sweet spot of, like, not all the responsibilities of a mom, but just the delight of hanging out with 2 young children. And just the delight I had in them, and the desire I had to see them achieve whatever they wanted to achieve, and just, like taking them to the skate park and taking them on adventures, and, like, watching the kid get just a little bit braver every time we went, and get a little more excited for something new, and watching the little girl, like, start from not walking to walking, and again, because I wasn't there all the time, it was always this big leap in progress, and it was always so exciting, and just feeling this, like, bubbling up, watching them as people achieve things, and just the delight I had in being around them. And it's like, that is how God is with us. That is the delight that he has with us. Like, he is not holding this exaggerated massive standard over our heads, being like, why have you not measured up yet? He is so delighted in us, and so willing and ready to celebrate the small progress. And I think we have to start believing that. And part of believing that is, like, the 4 habits of joyful people, like, having the self-discipline to take a negative thought and replace it with a happy thought, and take a negative thing that you always say to yourself, and choosing to replace it regardless of how you feel, because our minds are flexible. Like, we do have the ability to reframe our mindsets if we have the consistency, um and we have a good God who's partnering with us in that.
Yeah. James Bryan Smith says, I'm one in whom Christ dwells and delights. I live in the unshakable kingdom of God. The kingdom is not in trouble, and neither am I. And I think, we have to just keep internalizing that, because it is easy in the middle of a storm to want to run away. And there's that story about the bison and the cows. Bison or cows, when they see a storm coming, they head away from it. They try to run away from it. And obviously, the storm catches up, and then they end up being in the storm longer because they're traveling the same direction as the storm. Whereas bison, when a storm approaches, they don't run away from it. They run directly to and through it head on. And then their time in the storm is reduced. And if we can face unrest head on instead of running away, what our tendency is our kids misbehave at co-op, and we feel embarrassed and ashamed. And so we go home and start scrolling online, or we go home and eat a bunch of cookies, or we go home and watch a show. Like, we do all these things to essentially run away from the feeling of unrest, the storm that's in our heart. But instead, if we can run into that storm and just say, Jesus, I feel so sad and worried. My kids misbehaved today, and I'm afraid that this means I'm a failure as a mom. I'm afraid that this means that my kids will never be able to recite a poem. I'm afraid that this means that everybody's going to judge me and no one will want to be my friend. And then just, take those feelings to the Lord, and just, you could send them away. You could say, I recognize these are lies. I know that the truth of your word says that you are good. You could ask Jesus, like, what is true about me, Jesus? What is true? You could do the pause app and just release everyone and everything to God. But what you shouldn't do is run away from those feelings or numb out those feelings. And I know it's hard. Like, over the course of parenting, you're going to be humiliated over and over again. Like, I'm just going to tell you that right now. You will be humiliated, because these are not your, like, they're not your workmanship. They're God's workmanship. And so if you are putting your identity in your children, and you're trying to get your ego satisfied by your children, God's going to make sure that doesn't happen so that you are completely satisfied in Him, so that He is the king of your life. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. You are not perfect enough that you could save your children, and neither are you so broken that you could destroy them. You just don't have that power. And so I think that when things happen, if instead of catastrophizing and becoming so fearful or numbing out, if we could just go straight to Jesus, He loves us. He wants to be with us. He wants to comfort us. And sometimes Jesus looks like a phone call with a friend. Sometimes it looks like going and talking to a counselor. Sometimes it looks like, even calling up your parents. It's interesting because I think so many of us have parents who also are still dealing with their own childhood wounds, who don't have the identity safety. Like what we are working towards is being hidden in Christ, like being so safe in Jesus that what people think about us doesn't really matter, that what we look like compared to somebody else doesn't matter, that what our kids do compared to someone else's kids, it doesn't matter because our identity is completely hidden in Jesus. And so we can just be like children who are pretty much oblivious. Like I remember so vividly, one of my kids, we were potty training, but I don't think this child was that young, maybe 3 or 4, but the child had not developed a sense of shame yet. And we were at this amazing party in this fancy house in a fancy neighborhood. There was pony party, everybody around, and he just whipped out his wiener and peed on the rose bush. He might have had his back turned to everybody, and I hope that we didn't shame him. Like we lived out in the country. He was used to being able to pee outside, and that was a great way to prevent muddy feet coming out of the house and early potty train my boys. But in that moment, his dad and I were embarrassed. Like we were like, oh my gosh, what have we done? We're failures as parents. Why can't we teach our kids any basic manners? But really, it was a small thing in the grand scheme of things. And in some ways, like we don't want to go around peeing in fancy parties outside. That's not the point of this. The point of it is getting back to that childlike, just in uninhibitedness, that childlike safety, the sense that you have a father who loves you and it's going to be okay, that you. And I think that when we stop looking at our mistakes and we start looking at how good God is, then the mistakes start to be much more insignificant, and we'll probably make less mistakes because we're not so hyper focused on them.
I totally agree. I love that. And I think too, one of the best things we can also do is just go have fun. Like just go have an adventure. Go do something that fills you with joy. And I was visiting my boyfriend, and my dog was there, and he was getting hair everywhere. He was shedding everywhere, and I was kind of like getting a little bit like I needed to put some stuff in my car because I was getting ready to leave, and we ended up just like hanging out for a few minutes, chilling and petting my dog, and it was just ridiculous. But I was like, this moment is really precious, and nothing else is actually more important than this moment. And I think, yeah, go have fun. Go hug a kid, one of your kids. Go eat an ice cream in wintertime. Go do something that feeds your soul that's a little outrageous. Watch a comedy routine. Go laugh. Go run barefoot through the rain. Just go do something. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff isn't really that important that you're overwhelmed by.
It's so true, Emily. I love that. What a great way to close out this episode. So many of the things that feel really big right now are actually going to be very small in the grand scheme of things. But having someone to talk it out with and laugh about it with, and, taking a break. If it's school that's overwhelming you, take a break. If it's cooking, do something simple for a few days. Nothing is that important that all the joy should be sucked out of your home over it. Thank you for joining. We just bless you with hope and peace and joy in your homes. And you can join the Restoration Home community. Use code SPRINGOPEN20 to get 20% off this encouraging, life-giving community.